Good morning. It's good to see you. I hope you've been doing well the past few days. I would like to talk this morning about the idea of silence. There are good times to be silent. There are bad times to be silent. And we have a few points to get through, so I'm going to have to speak quickly this morning. One good time to be silent is when we are silent in submission. Think about Jesus on the way to the cross and what is said about him. As a lamb before its shearer is silent. We need to be silent in submission. There is also a time to be silent when we are wanting the people who we're dealing with to think about what we have said. For example, when they bring the adulterous woman to Jesus, Jesus speaks to them and then stoops down on the ground and he starts writing. He was giving them time to think. He wanted them to examine themselves. And hopefully you're familiar with the account because they did exactly that. It was time to stop speaking. Jesus said what he said, and then he wanted them to think. And we need to follow his example in that. But also, to go along with that a little bit, if we have said our piece, then we need to be quiet. Think about the verse, do not give what is holy to the dogs, do not cast your pearls before swine. Say your piece and move on. If it's time to move on, then move on. And we need to be quiet. There's also a time to be silent if we are busy. Consider Jesus as he sent the 70 out. And in the directions given to them, he says, greet no one along the road. They had things to do and places to go. They were busy with the Lord's work. Well, sometimes we're busy as well. And we don't want to be busybodies. We aspire to lead a quiet life, and that means a lot of times we will be silently busy. That's how it should be. We also need to make sure that we're silent before we speak. Think about Peter at the Mount of Transfiguration. He is startled awake. He starts speaking because he doesn't know what to do, doesn't know what to say. And what's the Lord tell him? This is my beloved Son, hear ye him. We need to make sure we are listening before we are speaking. Bad times to be silent. You might think about it. When the disciples were arguing on the road about who is the greatest, and they got to their destination and Jesus asked them, what were you arguing about? And they were silent. They were silent because they had a guilty conscience. They were busted, and they were silent. If we have a guilty conscience, we need to think about it. Another example of a bad time to be silent. Jesus is in the synagogue. There's the man with a withered hand. Jesus asked them there in the synagogue, was it right to heal the man on the Sabbath? And they were silent. They were filled with hatred. Jesus, it says, he was grieved at the hardness of their hearts. They were just filled with hatred toward him. A lot of times when people are silent, it's because there are bad things festering underneath, frankly. Another time that people were silent, you remember when the Pharisees came to Jesus, the Herodians came to Jesus, and the Sadducees came to Jesus. And after the Lord dealt with them all in Matthew chapter 22, at the end of the chapter, it says nobody dared ask him anything, and he had silenced all of them. He had swung the sword of the Spirit, and they were left without a leg to stand on. And they couldn't answer him, so they were silent. The last one I wanted to consider is in Luke chapter 20. Luke chapter 20, and this one I would like to read. The Pharisee, the chief priests, the scribes, all those, verse 1, Luke 20, verse 1, they come and they ask Jesus by what authority he had been doing these things. Jesus says, I also will ask you one thing and answer me. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? And they say, we don't know. Jesus says, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Sometimes people are silent because they do not want to have an open and honest conversation, and it's not a good thing. Hope you enjoyed this study today. Pardon me for going a little bit over. God bless you. Be a blessing to others. We hope to see you tomorrow.